You're listening to the SSPX podcast, and welcome to the first episode of our Apologetics series. Today we'll start with the very basic question of whether or not God exists. Father Paul Robinson, the publisher of Angelus Press and prior of St. Isidore's in Denver, Colorado, will join us to discuss this most basic of questions about our understanding of faith, the world, and our purpose. He'll also introduce us into the concept of apologetics and explain why it's vital for every Catholic to undertake a serious study of this field during their lifetime. You can find notes to all of these episodes at sspxpodcast.com/apologetics, as well as all our previous episodes. There as well, you can find a link to help support this project. This is free to listen to, as well as all of the resources we're posting, but by helping us with a one-time or small monthly recurring donation, you'll be making sure that we can continue this work of producing good Catholic content on a regular basis. Now, let's join Father Paul Robinson right now.
Well, Father Robinson, thank you for joining us on this new series that we have started, Apologetics. How are you, Father?
I'm doing well, Andrew. Excited to kick off this new series.
Good.
Yeah.
I am as well. And I guess before we get started diving into apologetics in this first episode, what is so important about apologetics? I think most Catholics probably have some sort of an idea about what apologetics is. It's the defense of the faith. But if I'm not arguing with anyone, does it help me? Does it help me with the practice of my own faith? What are the reasons for apologetics, Father?
Yeah, well, apologetics is designed to give an irrational account of your system of beliefs, your system of religious beliefs, because of the fact that religion is not an irrational endeavor. There's something very rational about religion. At least there's supposed to be. I would make the claim that to the degree that a religion is irrational, or in other words, it's not able to provide any rational basis for its beliefs, to that degree, it is a cult. In other words, people are just doing things for no reason whatsoever. Perhaps they're following a charismatic leader, or they're just having a system of practices that have no foundation in any reason, any intellectual basis for what they're doing. So the purpose of this series is for us to provide to our viewers the reason why Catholics believe what they believe, the intellectual basis for our faith. That's what apologetics does. And I would make the claim just at the outset that this is an area where Catholicism is so strong. For one thing, we have a 2,000-year history. We've been reflecting upon the revelation of our Lord Jesus Christ for 2,000 years. So we have a very articulated, very well-developed theology. But also because of the fact that we truly believe that Catholicism is the true faith. It comes from God. And if Catholicism, in fact, does come from God, if He, in other words, has spoken to us and given us truths of the supernatural order, and that same God is also the one who's created the natural order, and part of that natural order is our reason, then it would make sense that Catholicism would be able to make this bridge between the natural and the supernatural order in the best way. That in other words, we would be able to use what we know about the natural order to explain and make coherent to people what we believe in the supernatural order, because there would be an interlocking connection between the two. So in the end of the day, Catholicism makes a lot of sense. And that's what the burden is upon us to manifest that in these episodes that we're going to be going through.
Are we able, Father, to give proofs of the faith? Is it possible to say, yes, without a doubt, this is true? Is that what we're going to be doing in apologetics?
Yeah, well, that's an important question to address, because there has to be a delicate balance in addressing these questions of supernatural truths. So obviously, if we're talking about faith, we're not talking about things that will be subject to mathematical demonstration. Anything that is in the realm of religion, or the vast majority of the things that are revealed by God, could not have been known by human reason alone. So what I was talking about, the areas of the sects is those people who have religious beliefs and they say that there is no rational foundation whatsoever. You just believe it blindly. And on the other end of the spectrum would be those people who would claim that they would be able to prove with like demonstrative mathematical proof what they believe. And if that's the case, there is no faith. On the one hand, there's like 100% total faith. You don't know why you're believing what you're believing. They're like, money grows on trees. And you're like, okay. Like, well, prove it. Can you give some sort of rational basis for that? And they'd be like, no, and they just believe it. You're like, okay, this is what you have to do. I was like, okay. And the other areas, like, no, we can actually prove to you that the money grows on trees mathematically. So there's a middle ground where you have supernatural truths that are believed in a religion, and you provide to those who are prospective believers certain motives of credibility, what are called motives of credibility. We provide rational arguments that point in the direction of this supernatural reality being true, while it's not able to prove definitively. So it gets you most of the way. It provides you a certainty beyond a reasonable doubt, but it's not so certain that there's not room for your will to bridge the gap and say, well, this is very likely true. I think I will commit myself to this. So there's this room for the act of faith, but it's certainly very helpful for us to understand the truths of the faith as much as possible, in order to assist our minds, assist our wills rather, to latch on to those truths. And I mean, in the mind of the popes, and specifically Pope Leo XIII, Catholicism is able to provide very powerful motives of credibility, various rational motives for adhering to the truths of the faith, such that a person who considers them objectively, considers the arguments objectively, and is of good faith, would be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. So I just want to quote for you these words, these very kind of bold words of Pope Leo XIII in an encyclical he wrote in 1885, Immortali Dei. He says, "It cannot be difficult to find out which is the true religion, if only it be sought with an earnest and unbiased mind, for proofs are abundant and striking. We have, for example, the fulfillment of prophecies, miracles in great numbers, the rapid spread of the faith in the midst of enemies and in face of overwhelming obstacles, the witness of the martyrs, and the like. From all these, it is evident that the only true religion is the one established by Jesus Christ himself, in which he committed to his church to protect and to propagate." So this is the bold claim made by Pope Leo XIII, and it is our hope in this series of apologetic conferences, podcasts, to make that claim hold water, to go through the various aspects of the faith, provide the rational basis for them, and God willing, for the viewer to go away and say, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I've never heard it explained so clearly. So I mean, really, in this series, we are just addressing ourselves to anyone of goodwill who is interested in what Catholics believe and why they believe it. So there's no strings attached. It's just like, we just want to explain why we believe what we believe, and let the viewers decide for themselves whether they think that the reasons we give are cogent or not.
We're going to be going through many different areas, many different topics throughout this series, and we're going to be covering a lot of topics that are specifically Catholic in nature. Things having to do with the Blessed Virgin Mary, the saints. We're going to be talking about the papacy and Rome and all of that kind of thing. But we aren't really going to be starting with Catholic things first. We're going to be talking more about just, is there a God, is there not a God, those type of very broad questions, and then we're going to kind of funnel into more specific Catholic things as we go along. Is that correct?
Yes. So we want to give a coherent picture from start to finish of what we believe, and we actually have to start in the area of reason alone. What reason alone is able to prove. So sort of the realm of what's called theodicy. It's like, what can I prove of God just by the activity of my natural reason? And we know this can be done because the pagans, before the coming of Christ, Aristotle and Plato, for instance, they were able to make rational argumentation for the existence of a transcendent God who was the only God. There was one transcendent God. So these truths that we can prove about God, the nature of God, his role as creator of the universe, the nature of man, who man is, his immortal soul, the end of man, the natural end of man, all of these things fall within the realm of reason. And they're sometimes called in the Catholic world preambles to the faith. So you don't need to believe them on the basis of faith. They're certainly part of what Catholics are obliged to believe, but we are able to provide demonstrative proof of these things. So that's where we're going to start before moving to things that are supernatural truths and could not be known by reason alone. So it's interesting that I was mentioning that Catholics very much believe in the ability of the mind to know reality. I would make the claim more than other religions, and it's part of what we're required to believe. We're required to believe in the power of reason to prove the existence of God. In other words, the metaphysical proof for the existence of God that we're going to be going over in this podcast. Catholics are obliged to believe that it works. So when the modernist crisis, which is ongoing in the Church, when it was first starting in the pontificate of St. Pius X, he had Catholics make an oath against modernism. And one of the things that modernists denied, and it's very common today, agnosticism is sort of the intellectual characteristic of our age. There's very much a doubt of the ability of the mind to know reality today. But St. Pius X, he had all Catholics who are in a teaching position to make an oath. And part of the oath was them saying, I profess that the human mind can demonstrate the existence of God. So here's what this oath says. It says, first of all, I profess that God, the origin and end of all things, can be known with certainty by the natural light of reason from the created world, that is, from the visible works of creation as a cause from its effects, that therefore his existence can also be demonstrated. We're using that magic word, demonstrated. When we say demonstrated, we say, well, we can give you mathematical certainty. In this case, an even higher certainty, metaphysical certainty. So we should be able to provide evidence for the existence of God, where if you deny the existence of God, you would basically deny the ability of the mind to know anything, the whole basis of the rational order. And that God willing, that conclusion is so odious to someone that we would say, well, it's safe for me to say that I am able to know something. And if I know something, then, in other words, if I have a notion of being, the existing things, then I must necessarily conclude that there is a God. My only other option is to say, well, I don't know being, so I have no notion of existence whatsoever, and so I have no basis for concluding anything else, because everything that we conclude in the rational order is based on that notion of being that we have.
Right. And we have had in history, and I'm thinking back to 2 years ago now when we started the Crisis in the Church series, we have had throughout history all of these different philosophers trying to figure out how do you know what you know, right? Kind of that epistemology, metaphysical understanding of things. And sometimes they go kind of far off, and that's where we start to see some of these philosophical errors. If you want more on that, you can look back at Crisis in the Church series, episodes 2 and 3. Father Wiseman did a great job of explaining that. We're not going to get into all that here, but broadly speaking, if you can agree that you can know things through your reason, then we can start on a level playing field. That's basically what you're saying here.
Right. But at this point, Andrew, it's time for a commercial break. You can also read my book, The Realist Guide to Religion and Science, where I explain that...
But wait, there's more.
You too can become a realist. So what I try to explain in my book is that if you do not have this philosophical position that you believe in the ability of the mind to grasp reality at the level of our concepts, then you're necessarily going to fall into irrationality, what I was just explaining. Do I think that my mind is able to grasp the notion of being, that the notion of being that I have in my mind actually corresponds to reality? If I do not believe that my notion of being, basically my understanding of the word is, if I don't think that my understanding of the word is actually corresponds to reality, then how can anything that I say to anybody be true? So it's the most fundamental concept, the notion of being. That's what metaphysics studies is being. What is it that pertains to all things that exist by the fact that they exist? So what are the properties of all existing things? That's what metaphysics studies. So, but the modern philosophers, they would say that our notion of being is no good. Our concepts are no good. The concepts that we have in our mind, we can't know if they match with reality. The only thing we can know is sense data, sense knowledge, and that leads to massive problems. And I would argue, in a sense, all the problems we have in the modern world are tied back to this philosophical view that dominates today. Yeah, believe it or not.
Right.
But so read the book to know more.
I guess we're starting with the very basic question: is there a God?
Yes. This is where we're starting, and we do have to make some assumptions to embark on this question. We as human beings, because we do not stand above reality, but we are in reality. We have to make assumptions that certain intellectual principles are true. When we go back in our reasoning, all the way up to the chain of principles, to the top principles, we're going to reach certain principles that are the basis for proving everything else. And unless we assume that those principles are true, then we won't be able to prove anything. But it's obvious that you're not able to prove every principle. Otherwise, you would end up having a circular argument. You would be using things that are lower in the chain of reasoning to prove the things that are higher in the chain of reasoning. So there's very, very basic principles that are necessary for us to hold as being true, for us to prove anything at all. So I just want to go over a couple of those principles. One of them is that nothing comes from nothing. So this is another way to state the principle of causality, that an effect must be proportionate to its cause. So if you have a cause, it must be capable of producing the effect. And if you have nothing at all, then nothing is going to result. I mean, nothing cannot be a cause. So there's no such thing as spontaneous creation. There's no such thing as things popping into existence. If I believe that things just randomly popped into existence without a cause, then I would have no basis for concluding about anything in the universe. If I said, why is the fire heating and why is there heat? Do I feel heat? I would have to say, well, it's either because the heat just randomly popped into existence or it's because the fire is producing the heat. But I can't say, because anything can come from anything, So this is one of the most basic principles. Nothing comes from nothing. And the other is, one of these first principles is that everything must have a sufficient reason for its existence. If I look around me and I see, okay, the bush exists, or the computer exists, or whatever exists, there must be an adequate explanation for the fact that this thing is real. If there's no adequate explanation for the fact that the thing is real, if it just exists for no reason whatsoever, again, I destroyed the whole intellectual order. I'm saying that there's no way to account for anything that's existing, and therefore I'm not able to speak in any rational way about reality. So those are the first principles of all thought, of all argumentation, of all knowledge. If I do not admit these principles, effectively I'm saying I don't know anything. Nothing that I'm able to state about anything can be true. So once we admit these basic principles, these first principles, then we can go on to use them to derive certain conclusions about reality, and say, okay, why do the things around me exist? What is this adequate reason? What is the sufficient reason for the things around me to exist? And I look at the things that exist, and I look at dogs, I look at cats, I look at bushes, I look at cars, and I say, do these things contain within themselves the total explanation for their existence? Do I see in the dog something that says to me, this dog necessarily exists? It has to exist. There's no way that it could not exist. And if I saw that, then I would conclude that it is in itself a complete explanation for its existence. Whereas if I say, this dog doesn't have to exist. At one time it didn't exist, and in the future it will not exist. Therefore, it's not something that gives a total explanation for its existence. It's what we would call a contingently existing thing. It happens to exist. It doesn't have to exist. And so I'm leaving the question of why does it exist unanswered. I haven't come to a complete and satisfying answer to the reality of why this thing before me, this dog before me, exists, because I cannot find the answer in it. And the thing is, when we look out over the universe, all the things that are within our common experience, no one of them says to us, I have to exist. I am a self-existing thing. I have the complete explanation for me being real within myself. I am the total explanation for my own existence. That's not true of me. That's not true of you, Andrew. It's not true of anybody we know. Okay. And if we look in the dictionary and we look at the definitions for things, and then these are human beings giving an account of their knowledge of the real world around us, and we never find in the definition of things necessarily existing thing. A dog is a four-legged canine that exists. You never find that in the definition. Right. Nothing around us. It's clear to every rational, common sense mind that the universe around us consists of contingently existing things that do exist but don't have to exist. And so things that do not contain the total and complete explanation for themselves, for their existence in themselves.
Okay. That makes sense. So there is nothing that exists, just to kind of sum up what you've been saying, there's nothing that exists that must exist, basically, for the entire order of the universe to continue to exist around it. Things can come and go, and the world keeps spinning, essentially. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Or that says to us, I am a self-existing thing. I am not in a position of receiving existence. I exist by definition. By what I am, I must exist. Just because I am what I am, I have to exist. Nothing around us says that to us.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is a difficult concept for us to grasp. And Aristotle goes to a lot of trouble in his Metaphysics to explain why metaphysical thought is the most difficult thing to think about. Because of the nature of our minds. We find it much easier to think about tangible things of the senses, and the notion of being or contingency is like farthest from material things. And so what I do in my book is I try to go through a little exercise. It's like, let's make 3 columns of different things. In one column you have impossible things that could never exist. They're a contradiction in themselves, like a rock that's heavier than God could lift, or like a square circle. A circle is round by definition, and if it's a square, then it's not a circle. So you can't be both a square and a circle at the same time. They're contradictory, right? And that's the first column. So these things can never exist. And in the middle column is things that could possibly exist, but do not exist. And I put in there Bilbo Baggins, the Hobbits. Hobbits could exist. They existed in the mind of J.R.R. Tolkien, but he didn't have the power to create them. They exist in the movies, but they don't exist really. And I threw a joke. I actually threw a joke in there in that table. I don't know if anybody got it. I never heard back on that, but I said one of the things that could possibly... Okay. So you caught it? I said one of the things that could possibly exist but doesn't exist is Velveeta cheese. But anyway, there's a lot of things that could possibly exist, like unicorns or Pegasus or whatever, but don't exist. And then there are existing things. You exist, I exist, your dog or somebody else's dog or the bush that we have in our front yard. They all exist. So what is it that determines what exists and what does not exist? If there's a lot of things that could exist but don't exist, then why is it they don't exist? What is it that bridges the gap between the things that possibly could exist and the things that actually exist? It's clearly not the things themselves, because if there's no difference between these 2 columns, then everything would exist, right? Why do some things exist and some things not exist? Well, there must be some cause that's accounting for that. Why some things must have been chosen to exist, and some things not to exist. That's why there's no unicorns, because whoever's in charge of making things exist, and it's not us, it's not me, it's not you, it's not the dogs, it's not the bushes, that cause must have been accounting for what is real as opposed to what is not real.
It's very interesting.
So I mean, I just to put in another plug, might as well quote myself in my own book. Might
as well.
So
you've already done the work. Let's just use it.
I know.
It's fine.
So, and maybe you can put this table up there for the viewers to see. But I say there, when we come to the third column, the column of things that are real, we see that there must be some reason why they are so. That is, why they are something rather than nothing, in Leibniz's words. If there wasn't a need for an extra cause to move from column 2 to column 3, then we would have to say there is no difference between existing and not existing, which is surely not the case. Those in column 2 have essence without existence, while those in column 3 have both. And so the cause that bridges the appalling gap between the two is the one that accounts for existence, that is, the very fabric of reality as such. This cause we commonly call God. So if I perceive around me anything that exists contingently, that doesn't have to exist, that doesn't have within itself the total explanation for existence, for its own existence, that is not self-existing, then my mind necessarily demands, where is its existence coming from? It needs a cause for its existence. And that cause must be some being that is providing the act of existence, that is making it real, as opposed to just merely possible. We would claim that cause of the existence of contingent beings is what human beings generally call God. The first cause of the existence of contingently existing things is what we call God. And if I do not believe in a God, if I do not accept this, then I cannot give any account for why anything exists whatsoever. I can't give a rational explanation for why anything exists whatsoever. The contingency of all the things around us screams out, I need a cause for my existence. And that is a creator. That cause must be a creator.
So those who would deny the existence of God or say that we need a rational proof for the existence of God would simply say probably, and I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here, Father, they would probably simply say, we just don't know yet. Science hasn't told us yet, but there must be a reason out there. I was actually just on Twitter earlier this morning or yesterday and saw a tweet from Scientific American maybe, or NASA, or one of those accounts I follow, and they said, before the Big Bang, there was no matter, it was just pure energy. And I looked at that and I said, yes, and that energy we call God. That's more of the proof from, first mover maybe. It's a different quote than we're talking about here, but how would you, so an atheist is going to come to you and say, well, we just haven't figured it out yet, but there is a logical reason out there. It's this. How would you combat that?
Yeah. So, I would say to the atheist that we are arguing at a different level here. And what I have to try to do to the atheists, typically they're very scientific-minded people, and they have certain epistemological presuppositions, and one of them being that the only true knowledge is sense knowledge. So they come into this discussion assuming that the only way to prove anything is from things that can be observed. And I would argue, well, we can observe what I'm talking about, but you have to be willing to accept that our idea of being, not our idea of forces, gravitational forces, or things that can be measured, that even things that cannot be measured, we can know. Our mind has the ability to know things that cannot be seen and cannot be measured. And not just gravity and forces of physics, what we would call material and efficient causes. But we can know things such as being, which would pertain more to what's called the formal cause. And if I can get him to accept that, then we're all good. We're all good. Okay. But if I cannot get him to accept that, then I would have to fall back on some sort of argument from the Big Bang, what's called the Kalam cosmological argument. This has been popularized by Protestant theologian William Lane Craig of Reasonable Faith. So he does not believe in the metaphysical argument for God. If you read his book From Plato to Leibniz, the cosmological argument throughout history, you will find in there that he doesn't accept the arguments of St. Thomas Aquinas, the famous 5 proofs for the existence of God. We just went over the third of St. Thomas's proof, the argument from contingency. But William Lane Craig doesn't accept those. And so when he argues with atheists, he always goes to what's called the Kalam cosmological argument. It's an argument made by Muslims in the Middle Ages, Muslim philosophers. It basically goes like this. It's like whatever has a beginning must have a cause. The universe has a beginning, therefore the universe must have a cause. And let's just say that the Big Bang theory causes a lot of difficulties for atheists because they have to admit that basically the universe began from effectively nothing. There was no space and time. And in a single instant of time, you have the origination of of space, time, and matter, and there has to be an adequate explanation for that. And so whatever caused that has to be outside of time, has to be outside of space, has to be outside of matter. And yeah, it makes the atheist squirm. And everybody always asks, well, what was before the Big Bang? And the obvious answer is, well, God.
Right.
But the argument that we're going through here is far superior to the argument, that Kalam cosmological argument. It does not rely upon some scientific theory. And as we're going to see, we're able to derive from this cosmological argument a thick version of God rather than a very thin version of God. So the thick version of God would be a God with the attributes of God that we know also by revelation. There's so many attributes of God that we can derive from this metaphysical proof. So when we conclude to, therefore God exists, we must say what is contained in that notion of God that we've derived, because there's many different ideas about God. God is just a word. So what is the concept that corresponds to that word, God? It depends on the proof that you use. So the proof of where you reach a God who kicks off the universe and with a big bang, a sudden burst of energy where he creates all the matter of the universe, is a God that's not so close to the Catholic God, because he's kind of more like the deist God of the Freemasons, who just sort of he kicks off the first domino, he goes and takes a smoke break, and he says, wow, he just watches his own handiwork. But he's not the God who's acting at every moment on the universe to sustain reality in the universe. So this argument goes back in time. It says, well, there has to be somebody to kick it all off. But the argument that I'm giving you refers to a cause that must be acting at every moment. And this is something that's really, really important for us to understand about what we just went through. That when we talk about, well, there must be a first cause for the existence of all contingently existing things, we are speaking about a cause that necessarily must act at every single moment for the things to exist. We can make a comparison between two different types of causality to illustrate this. So you can have, if I'm pounding a nail into a wall, all right. So I'm pounding the nail, and when I've done my work, I don't have to act on the nail anymore for it to stay there. I act in a couple of moments of time, I produce the effect, and the effect remains without the cause continuing to act on the nail. So this is called a per accidens or accidental causality, where you just have to act on one moment of time and the effect remains without the cause needing to be there for the effect to exist. But if I go and I hang a picture on that nail, and I've got a few pictures here. I've got a crucifix there, and I've got a picture of St. Pius X. I've got Archbishop Lefebvre. So if I want those pictures to remain there, the nail has to remain on the wall. So the nail has to be acting on the picture at every moment for the picture to hang on the wall. And that's the way it is with causing existence. For anything to hang out in reality, if it's a contingent thing, God has to be providing the act of existence. If he lets off providing the act of existence at any moment, the existence, as it were, falls to the ground. The thing is reduced to nothing. So this is how we can speak of God's providence. God must be providing the existence, the very fabric of reality at every moment for things to exist, because everything around us is contingently existing. It depends upon God at every moment. It's not a question of God just saying, boom, let's just make stuff. Let's just make the universe, and now I'm done. But no, God has to act all the time for anything to exist at all.
This is why you're saying it's providing us with a more thick idea of who God is. It's because he is someone who must be providing us with something at any given time, and the moment he stops, it all falls apart, instead of just sending the Big Bang out and whirling and, like you said, taking a smoke break. I love that analogy. But God must be continually active in creation, in the world, in the universe, for things to continue.
Yes. And when I consider what am I asking someone to admit in order to accept the existence of God, if I use this argument from contingency of St. Thomas versus the Kalam cosmological argument, well, what I'm asking you to admit is basically that contingent beings exist, that there are things which exist around us that do not have to exist. That's all I need you to admit. I mean, and for me, that's just so basic. That's so obvious.
Yeah.
Like none of us have to exist, and none of us have the adequate explanation for our own existence in ourselves. And so there must be some reason why we exist as opposed to non-exist. And that must be something that's giving us to existence. It must be provided from outside of us. There must be some existence maker, some creator. So I'm asking for really minimal commitment intellectually in order to get the person to accept the conclusion. Whereas with the Kalam cosmological argument, I'm going to have to sit down to you and we have to talk about the Big Bang Theory, and we're going to talk about the measurements and CMBR, the cosmological microwave background radiation and the distance of the stars and so on. And if you accept that, you would accept all this science and this theory, which is backed up by certain observations, that the universe began, basically from nothing 13.7 billion years ago. So for me, that requires a much greater commitment and faith on the part of a person than this argument from contingency. And also we get a much better God out of it, if we can say that.
Yeah. Well, it gives us a little bit of a springboard into what Revelation tells us. It's a little bit more easy. It's a little bit easier to get to that next level of understanding of God from this argument, which is very interesting, Father. I guess the next point is, then now that we have this basic definition that there must be a first cause of, I went back to the other argument. This first contingent, I'm totally stumbling all over myself. This is hard stuff.
Yeah, this is not easy. This is not easy.
So
yeah,
now that now that we have this idea of God at a very basic level, what other attributes does this argument give us about God? What else can we know about God based on reason, based on this argument?
Right. So we can derive a lot of attributes of God, what God necessarily must be. If he, in fact, is the first cause at every moment of the existence of all contingently existing things, then we can derive many attributes of God. And let me just take a little side note to whine and complain about the vast number of people out there who get St. Thomas Aquinas' arguments for the existence of God wrong. And even philosophers, I can expect Richard Dawkins to get it wrong, like in the God Delusion, and he gets it so wrong, he's not even close. These scientists out there who don't even understand metaphysical thought, and they just blow off St. Thomas, and they make this caricature of his arguments. They always think about him going back in time. They always think his arguments are about going back in time, but they're not going back in time. They are climbing a causal chain that exists at every moment, that necessarily must exist at every moment. They abstract from time. They do not rely on time. So a lot of St. Thomas's arguments speak about an infinite regress of causes. And immediately people start thinking, oh, you mean going back in time. No, we don't mean going back in time. Please, please, please don't go down there. You're getting him wrong. This is not the way it is. There's this PBS video that goes through the 5 proofs of St. Thomas for the existence of God. And he gets in the end, he says, well, these arguments actually may not hold water because, you can go back in time with an infinite regress. And that's where you need to say, you need one of those vast number of people, YouTube talking heads out there today who love to criticize other videos, where you would put like an X through the guy and you would hear like boos in the background, and like wrong stamped on that. Yeah. So, I mean, I'll leave that to you, Andrew, but
Fair
yeah,
enough.
let's treat St. Thomas's arguments with respect, at least the respect to try to get them right before we try to refute them. There's another character out there that is so annoying. And Edward Fazer, who's a great Thomistic philosopher, and I'll promote his work too. What the heck, So he has a book called 5 Proofs for the Existence of God. But he addresses some of these caricatures of St. Thomas's arguments that are made, like Bertrand Russell, who says basically if God is needed as a first cause for everything, well, who caused God? And that's when we get the boos out for Bertrand Russell as well. And we say, we cancel him.
And that's when we kind of go, that is the point.
Exactly. There has to be something that is uncaused to explain the existence of all contingent reality. Right. But Bertrand Russell would essentially be saying that our argument is that everything has a cause. And we never said that. St. Thomas never said that. Nobody ever said that. Nobody ever said everything has a cause. Therefore, there must be an ultimate cause, and that's God. Nobody ever made that argument, ever, no how. But it's just a caricature. And as a homework assignment for this podcast, I would have people go listen to the epic debate, and it's a very short debate, between Bertrand Russell and Father Frederick Copleston, S.J., that took place on BBC Radio back in 1948. And I made a summary of this debate for my students, and I ended up putting it on Quora. But Father Copleston, he makes the argument from contingency, the same argument I'm making in this podcast. And Bertrand Russell, he just flounders and he's haggling over terms and the meanings of terms. And basically, he says, he falls back on saying, well, it's meaningless to say the words like cause and contingency, that these are meaningless words. He falls back on saying that the mind is not capable of knowing reality. And that's where it ends. It's not a long debate as a result.
Right. If you can't, like we said at the very beginning, if you can't agree on that fundamental, we can't go anywhere.
Yeah, I'd be like, Bertrand, then why are we using the word is? I mean, if we can't coherently, we can't have a concept for the word is that matches up with the reality, then why are we talking at all? There's a breakdown of communication at that point. We cannot predicate accurately of anything. Say X is Y. Whenever we say that, we're dealing with this faulty notion of the word is. So anyway, I digress. So let's talk about some of these attributes about God that we can derive from this cosmological proof. It's also, St. Thomas's proof is also called a cosmological proof because it relies upon what we observe. But it's a metaphysical proof as opposed to a scientific proof. So this metaphysical proof, where we say there must be a first cause for the existence of contingently existing things, we have to say that God possesses exactly what the things around us lack. So he must have the adequate explanation for his existence in himself. He must be self-existent. There must not be this difference between his essence or his nature and his existence. His essence, what he is, must be to exist. He has to be a pure act of existence. He must be uncreated. He doesn't need someone to provide him his existence because that's what he is. By his very nature, he is an existing thing. So he has the adequate explanation for his existence in himself. He is uncaused, and he's utterly simple. He's not put together. There's not like this nature that needs to be given existence from the outside, like the nature of man. You can think of Bilbo Baggins or like a hobbit. Bilbo Baggins is in essence, we have a concept of what a hobbit is, but it doesn't have existence, so it needs to be provided existence. There's nothing in the essence of hobbit that demands existence, and they don't exist. But with God, he exists by definition. It is what he is. He's in the business of isness, as they say. So he's uncreated. He's utterly simple. He's not composed of metaphysical parts, essence, and existence. He has to be unique. There can only be one of him. Because of the fact that he's utterly simple, he's just an act of existence. And so it's impossible for there to be two beings who are pure existence. If you say I've got being one, and being one, its essence is the same as its existence. I got being two, its essence is the same as its existence. Well, then there's nothing to differentiate them. There would be nothing to distinguish them one from another. So God, the being who is pure existence, must necessarily be unique. There cannot be two beings whose essence or being is to exist. God must be omnipotent. If he has this capacity to give existence to things which do not have existence of themselves, then he must have the capacity to make anything that could possibly exist. I mean, for God, there's no limits to what he can create other than what reality can sustain. So I said it's impossible for there to be a square circle. But for anything that is possible, just by the fact that you can give existence, you have the power to give existence, you can make anything. And so there's no limit to your power, because one reason for this is that you're not limited by a subject that you're acting upon. So if I want to make something myself, then I'm going to be limited by the thing that I'm acting upon. If I want to build a house, I'm going to be limited by the nature of the wood and the nails and so on. I'm taking something that already exists and I'm working with it, I'm modifying it. So I'm going to be limited by the constraints of these already existing things that I'm shaping and modifying to make something else. But that's not the way it exists for God. He starts the blank slate and I'm going to make something exist that formerly had nothing of existence. And if you can do that, you can make anything. So God's omnipotent. God is also unchanging. He is pure existence. And if you're pure existence, if you're utterly simple, a simple act of existence, the only thing that you could change to is non-existence. There's nothing else. Nothing else. Because you don't have any qualifications on your existence. It's just you exist. That's it. You're just pure active existence. So there's no qualifications. There's nothing to be added. There's no limitation on your isness. So God the only thing for him possibly to change to is non-existence. And, well, he can't do that because he is by his nature an existing thing. I mean, it's his very nature to exist. So it's impossible for him not to exist. That's the only thing he could change to. And so he's unchanging. But that doesn't mean that he's inert. Whenever we think of unchanging things, we think of rocks or books or whatever, things that just sit around. But this is God unchanging in a supreme level of activity. So he's at the very top of the ontological chain, and he is the most active being. I mean, if he's sustaining everything in existence at every moment, then he's doing a heck of a lot more than you and I are, you know?
Right.
So what it means is simply that what God does, he does always. And he never ceases from doing what he does. But he doesn't alter his activity. Also, he's eternal. He's not in time. He's not subject to succession. Anything that is in time changes by the fact that it's in one moment, then it's in the next moment, and so on. It's like time is like a river. We can think of a river, and if you're in the river, you're flowing. Things succeed one another. Whereas God is like someone who is above the river. He's above all time. He stands above all time at a single point of existence. So he's eternal. He's eternal. He has always existed, has always been supremely active, doing what he does and being what he is. So if things exist at a certain time, if he willed to bring things into existence at a certain time, he can do that because he's above time. So he stands outside of time, and he wills whatever effects happen in time from one act that's eternally existed. So if I, to give an example, if I were able to take all the activities that I did for 2021, and I was able to say, I want everything that I'm going to do for 2021 to happen. And by the fact that I wanted it, it actually happened. Just by the act of my will, it actually happened. Then I would be like God. So God is standing at one point, one eternal moment, and he wills all that he wills with that one act. And by the fact that he wills it, every effect that he desires happens. So he doesn't have to wait around for 21 to January 1st to come around, and he does the things for January 1st, then he does the things for January 2nd. He doesn't wait around. He just wills things from eternity, and they happen when he wills them to happen by the fact that he wills them.
Wow.
That would be an amazing power. I mean, if any of us could do that.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. There's a word in the Psalms, omnia quicumque voluit fecit. All that God wanted, he did. And we could say all that he wants is done by the fact that he wants it. Whereas for us, it's not enough for me to want it. I have to do it as well. I have to execute. But in God, willing and executing is one and the same thing. So God is simple, unique, omnipotent, unchanging, eternal. He's also immaterial because material things necessarily have limitations. They are changing. Material things change by their very nature. If you are material, you have parts. You undergo change. You're passive. You're not supremely active. God can't be material for that reason. God has to be perfect. Things that are imperfect are incomplete. They need completion. They lack something. But God is pure existence. There's nothing that can be added to God. There's nothing that he can take on. So if he's just pure being, then what are we going to add to God? Nothing. God has to be pure goodness. It sort of goes with perfection. The philosophical definition of goodness is for you to achieve your end. The end of a thing defines what is good for it. So think of a soccer game. The goodness in a soccer game is scoring goals. That's the whole point of the game, is to score goals. And we would define a team as good by their ability to score goals. And we would define a team as bad by their inability to score goals. So if the soccer team achieves its end, we would say they are a good team. If they don't achieve their end, they're not a good team.
Right.
So with God, we would say, is God achieving his end? And we would say, yes, he is. God is supremely achieving what he is, and in his one eternal moment. There's nothing more that he could be achieving. He's always at the top of his game. Whereas we're not always at the top of our game. Sometimes a lot of times, every day we're sleeping. When I'm sleeping, I'm not at the top of my game. I don't know if you're at the top of your game. My activity right now is much, much higher than my activity when I'm sleeping. So I would be better, I would be superior as a human being if I never slept, and I was always doing podcasts about metaphysics. But I'm not capable of that, so I'm not as good as I could be. But that's not true of God. Then God has to be omniscient. For him to create everything, sustain everything in existence, he has to know the things that he's creating. He has to have knowledge of what he's doing. There's no way God can be just sort of blindly emitting stuff. So if he creates and sustains in existence all things, then he knows them intimately. And what does he sustain in existence? Everything. So he knows all things. And then lastly, he has to be all-loving. So again, the philosophical definition of loving, and I saw Matt Walsh giving this definition the other day to Ben Shapiro on a podcast. He just gave the Thomistic definition of loving, and that's to will the good of another. That's what it means to love. Mm-hmm. And what does God do? God gives to all things the ultimate good, and that is the good of existing as opposed to non-existing. He's the reason why we're real, and that the ultimate poverty is not to exist. So God is sustaining all things that exist in existence, and that's from his goodness, from his love. He's kind of loving things into existence at each moment, and it's only giving on the part of God. Of course, we're not capable of perfecting God. We don't perfect God. We don't add to him. And so when God loves, it's gratuitous. It's a pure love. It's a loving without getting anything back in himself. Of course, we adore God. We give our acts of love, but because we have a duty to do so, not as if we're perfecting God, So
he doesn't need our worship. He doesn't need our affection even. He desires it, but it's something that is owed to him out of the benefit of us being created.
Right. But regardless of what we do, God is going to be utterly perfect, and my homage does not complete him. Whereas whenever we give something to somebody, if I give a gift to a friend, then I would want to give it as purely as possible without expecting anything back. But at the same time, I'm still going to be a little bit satisfied by the fact that I'm giving the gift. I'm going to be kind of happy with myself. I'm going to be kind of fulfilled with giving a gift. Or if I see some homeless person on the side of the road and I give him $50, I'm going to walk away and I'm like, well, I don't expect anything back. But at the same time, I'm going to be perfected by doing that action. It's going to have an effect on me, which is not true of God. So that's 10 attributes that we can say must necessarily belong to God by the fact that he is the source of the existence of contingently existing things. And that book I was referring to of Edward Fazer is very good with deriving these attributes of God. And these attributes of God, they match up quite nicely with the attributes of God that are revealed in Scripture, and especially in the incarnation of God in our Lord Jesus Christ. This is where reason and faith just kind of seamlessly meet together. It's amazing what reason can perceive of God, what God must be if he is the source of reality and to compare with the incarnation of our Lord and say, well, they match up quite nicely.
Wow. That is beautiful. I had never seen, I'd studied Aquinas's proofs. I had gone through some of this before, but I had never seen those 10 attributes. But you're right. It logically does flow all one from the other, and it makes sense. And it's a beautiful thing.
It is. So as I say, if people are just willing to accept this line of argumentation, which to a certain degree requires a level of abstraction, but on the other hand is quite simple, namely that they're
right.
The things around us do not have an adequate explanation for their own existence in themselves. Therefore, they must be receiving existence for us to give any manner of account for the fact that they exist. And that existence must be an existence provider, must have the capacity to give existence, and must be a necessarily existing thing. He must exist of himself. And from there, well, the rest of these things follow logically.
Well, Father Robinson, wow, that was a heck of a way to kick off a series. We got deep, we got chewy, and it was fascinating. So thank you, and I can't wait to be here in the seat with you and the other priests as we go through all the rest of the Apologetics episodes. On that note, what do we have planned coming up next?
Yeah, so next, I think of what I would just like to talk about some of the two primary objections that people make against the existence of God. So now that we've seen St. Thomas's argument and fleshed that out, see the two strongest objections that have historically been made against the existence of God. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully it'll be enlightening.
Absolutely. Father, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Apologetics series on the SSPX podcast and on our YouTube page. Please consider subscribing to the YouTube account and the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are found. And please consider leaving a rating or a review on this podcast. This will help to make sure more people can find this podcast and discover the beauty and the truth of traditional Catholicism. Until next time, thank you for joining us, and God bless you.